Hey there Titans, in this video I'll show you how to use subflows with Titan flows. Okay, so let's get right down to it and then I'll talk about a little bit about use cases. So what you can do now, directly from a flow, you can call another flow. So if I'll select an action of a flow and I'll say select a flow. Right now I don't have any other flows, but we'll do some use case here. And then we can basically call that flow and pass in variables. So let's say if you have a very complex flow and you want to break up your flow to little compartmentable flows. So let's say that we have something that gets a record. So we'll say Salesforce, and I'll say, let's say we will get an account. So I'll get an account and my condition will be account ID equals my, let's add a variable and we'll say static and we'll call this ACC ID, and I'll use this one from Titan web project. You can run it from Salesforce. I'm just gonna do it for demo purposes real quick. Okay, so that equals ACC ID, and we want to map something from the account ID. So we'll say, let's add another variable, and we'll say account name, apply, and we'll map this to the account name. Cool. Okay, let's run the get and say, this is really silly, but we'll say after finish, I'll do a condition and I'll say if the account name, so we'll say global variable param account name contains edge, then what I want you to do is create a contact. But instead of creating a contact here, I'll call a subflow. So I'll have a flow that always create contacts. Okay, so I'll call another flow, and before we do this, let's go ahead and create the other flow. And we will say, go back here, I'll do new project, and I'll say flow. We'll call this create contact flow. Just so you get the hang of this. And what we want to receive here is we'll go over to tools, custom variables, add a variable, and I'll say I want to receive the account ID. So I know how to create it to relate it to that account. And I want to say first name, and I want last name as well. So last name, and that will be fine for me now. And let's add a node here, and we'll say Salesforce Action, and I'll say create new, and I'll say push create contact, and action create, and my mapping is account ID equals to my global variable account ID, last name to my variable last name, and first name to my variable first name. And this is a very, very simplistic usage here, but you can get the idea of this, that you can basically compartmentalize your flows. Each flow does one action and you can call it and save yourself a lot of conditions and a lot of nodes in a much bigger flow. Okay, so we'll save this guy and let's publish it. We don't need Apex in this instance, and that's fine. Let's go back to our Mr. Flow, and what I will do here is run the flow, and I'll call my subflow. Let's just refresh this guy so we get the data. Okay, and we'll get create context flow, configure parameters, and now I get everything here. So I can see the record ID, I can see account ID, everything that I have. So here I'll map it from my global variable account ID, and now I can either map it from anywhere I want, do more logic for first name, last name. In this instance, I'll say hello, and here we'll say subflow. Next, insert, and let's go ahead and publish the flow. Okay, that's cool. Now let's invoke this thing. So let's go to any web project, and let's go, let's say, to this guy. And what I will do here is I'll add a simple button, and I'll say call Mr. Flow. And you can obviously run it from Salesforce and use the whole power of the flow, but in this one, we're just gonna call it like this. So we'll say flow, we'll call Mr. Flow, configure parameters, and we want to say account ID equals to something. We can do field, and I actually have a global variable here, but I'm just gonna run it statically just for the purposes of this demonstration. And we will say, okay, this one is edge, and what I will do is pass in the account ID like so. It's not what we wanted. Okay, so we'll do this again. Say flow, select our Mr. Flow, parameters, we want our account ID, hit apply, next, insert, and that will invoke our flow. Okay, let's save this, and let's hit preview. So we'll call Mr. Flow, and what I will do is I'll head over to integration logs to see what's going on. So I'll go to settings, and let's take a look at my logs, and I can see Mr. Flow ran, and then create contact flow ran as well. So let's take a look at our contact. That's perfect. So I created our rule. Let's see the contact that it created. So I'll head over to edge, and let's see our contact, and let's see hello subflow. This is the guy right here, and that was created. If I go to a different account, let's say I'll get this guy, and let's just change this real quick and dirty. We will pass in to the flow a different account ID. So in this instance, it will not contain edge like we did in the condition. Again, this is really not usable. It's just a simplistic explanation of the subflows. And I'll run call Mr. Flow, and if I'll head back to my integration logs and refresh, in this instance we will only run Mr. Flow, and no contact will be created since it didn't call the subflow. So before then we ran Mr. Flow, and then our subflow was created and created that contact. And that's how it's done.